So what we want to do here is we want to talk about how organizations solve their collective action problem. How do organizations get others to contribute to them so that they can achieve the public good they want to achieve? And obviously, honestly, the public good that they believe others want as well, they're just not willing to contribute. They're prone to free ride. So let's talk about this. Probably one of the big ways this is done. And again, if we want to understand how terrorist organizations work, we can just look at how regular organizations work, and we're going to see this. So one of the first things that you can do, you can change the incentives of potential members. So it's not that I don't want the beach cleaned. It's just I don't want to spend my time doing that if the beach is going to be cleaned anyways. So if you can entice me, so for example, if I said, you want to go clean the beach with me, that we're going to use the beach this weekend, you want to go clean the beach with me today. Of course, Jessica's already in on this, but the rest of you guys are super lazy, don't want to do that. So what if I say, I'll give you $100 if you go with me to clean the beach? A lot more of you would go do that. That's because I've changed your incentives. I've given you something for contributing. If you don't go, you don't get $100. If you do go, you do get $100. We call this the byproduct theory. You provide some private good that only goes to contributors. So we can also call this the AAA rule. So for those of you who have AAA membership, I have AAA membership. I'm going to ask you right now to say into your phone, why are you a member of AAA? Did I say phone? Your computer, your iPad, whatever it is. More than likely, you just said for the towing. That's what almost always everybody joins AAA for, is the towing. That is a private good. The purpose of AAA, the goal of AAA is not to make sure everybody's towed around the world. AAA is the American Automobile Association. It is a lobbying group that lobbies Congress for better infrastructure, meaning better roads. It is a lobbying organization for better roads. Now, would you give money to an organization for better roads? Do you want better roads? You love better roads, but you don't want to contribute to it. You want somebody else to contribute. You want a free ride on this. So in order to get people to contribute to AAA, they provide some private good, like, for example, towing or insurance or things like that. That's called the byproduct theory. We provide some private good only to contributors. So, for example, only those people who join the organization, or let's even think suicide terrorism, those who contribute in suicide terrorism, you will get, for example, a private good that only contributors get. You will become a martyr. You will go to heaven. Your family will get an annual amount of money. These are all private goods that only go to contributors. I can also add, by the way, to this private good, something that was from that video you're just watching. This can include things like identity, purpose, a sense of belonging. That's a private good as well, that as a contributor, I feel a certain purpose in life. That may be enough to sort of tip me into contributing. Another way you can change incentives of potential members is to raise the salience of the issue. And salience just means how relevant it is. So you make not contributing appear more costly than it actually is, or than you thought that it was. So for example, if we just had a long class day in which, let's just say Jessica came to class and she did a whole presentation about how the beaches are just disgusting and dirty. She did a speech on this, and maybe it gets you guys a little more fired up. And by the end of that hour, then she says, do you guys want to go clean up the beach with me? I would bet more people would say yes, because the salience of the issue. It's not that you didn't care about it before. You cared about it before, but now just in that hour's time, it's sort of raised in importance in your mind, and not doing something about it seems more costly than it did an hour before. So you can raise the salience of the issue. You can use shame, prestige, God, duty. These are all ways to sort of change the incentives in the person's mind. This is why terrorism is often attached to religion or nationalism, because it's easier to say, if you don't do this, then here's God won't like you. You'll not have done your duty, whatever that is. You should be ashamed. Look how proud we are of you. These things actually do motivate how we do things. They do change how we think about these things. I'll give you one more way to change the incentives of potential members. So another example that we sometimes think about is like a group project. You guys are in a class and you all get put in a group of like 6 people, and the professor says, you guys all get to share this grade. So there's your public good right there, is the grade. It's non-excludable, it's non-rivalrous. And then let's say you look around this group and you see this person in your group who wants to go to med school, who is super smart, who's never gotten an A- in their life, let alone a B. You know what you do then? And you guys all know this. You rely on that person to do a lot more of the work because they have more at stake than, say, maybe you do. We call this the idea of the political entrepreneur, where someone pays the extra cost. So maybe you've got someone like in Al-Qaeda, someone like bin Laden, who's willing to put in more money to contribute more to this thing. Or you'll have a state sponsor. Another example might be the OCD roommate. We want to keep our house clean. We're all sort of clean, but there's one person in the house who's a little bit over the top with these things, and they really, really, really can't stand anything dirty. Well, they'll put in a little more effort on this particular thing. They will pay extra costs to get enough contributions in there. It doesn't mean you want them to do all of it, but you can find ways to sort of have others contribute to that. So this is one way that you can sort of change the incentives of potential members and make it more likely that people will not free ride, but will contribute to your organization. There's 2 other ways we want to talk about very quickly. I don't want to drag this on too far. Another is something we talked about with the environment, and that is voluntary community consent of rules. Is that we can sort of come together and say we're all going to agree to these potential things. So there's community, mutual monitoring. So we all know, again, let's take that group project again. Oftentimes what usually happens in those situations is everybody is assigned a task. And the reason why is because if towards the end of the project some task isn't done, everybody knows who's responsible. That's called monitoring. And then you also want to add in this idea of a credible punishment. If you don't do something, then we are going to shame you. We're going to kick you out of the group. We're going to, leading to worse and worse things, I guess you could say. Another way to make this work better, would you rather do a group project with 20 people in your group or with 3 people in your group? And the answer is usually smaller group size. Granted, you have to do more work as a sort of, instead of doing 1/20th the entire task, you have to do 1/3 the entire task. But smaller group size makes it easier to know who's cheating and who's not. When you have 20 people, 4 or 5 people can just slide by and do nothing, and they kind of get away with it. So it's easier to monitor with a smaller group size, and that makes community consent of rules much easier. One more thing that can be done in order to make this work out a lot better is extensive interaction. So kinship ties is a good way that this sort of works. The more things that we are working together on, and the more time that we're doing this, the easier this becomes. Because we find patterns of monitoring. We know who's more likely to do what. Punishments become more real because if we're only doing this group project once and then we'll never see each other again, if I cheat or don't contribute, then that's it. You can't do anything to me. But if we're gonna be in groups for the next year, we're gonna be in 20 more groups. If I don't contribute this time, the punishments can go on and on and on. And so it actually turns out that kinship ties are a way, particularly in terrorist organizations, that all this works pretty well. If let's say you're in a cell with your cousins and your cousins start to say, I don't think I really want to do that attack. Well, then what can happen is not just that you can sort of say, well, I'm going to shame you now, But you can also make sure that your cousin is never allowed to do any of the more of the family things that are really important. So the more it creates more interaction, which makes it easier to do these things. I don't know why I keep underlining things. I just like to use the Apple Pencil. So personal commitments and relationships can play a role in this, and trust plays a role in this as well. So we'll often see, particularly with terrorist organizations, because there's not a lot of other ways to enforce rules, is terrorist organizations will often be in cells, and those cells will often have either an ethnic or a kinship connection between them. So if you look at the people who did the 9/11 suicide bombing, they were in cells, and those cells tended to be, for the most part, related to each other. One more thing that's going to help you solve this collective action problem if you're an organization, and that's institutionalization, where you take the informal rules and you make them formal. Because what this does is establishes regular standardized procedures. Don't ask me to go in depth on how a terrorist organization can do this. I don't really know. I'm just telling you how to solve a collective action problem, but this is a way this is done. You got to believe that in the early days of Al-Qaeda, it was pretty informal. But as time goes on, some of those informal things become more formalized. More regular standardized procedures are in place. Because what this does is it reduces transaction costs. It makes it easier to interact with each other. And it also locks in power asymmetries. That may sound like a bad thing, but sometimes power asymmetries are important in institutions and organizations. What an institution can do, and I don't know if you remember our definition of this, an institution is a humanly devised, means created, constraint on behavior. So we talked about like an institution could be when you meet each other, you shake hands. Now in coronavirus times, when you see each other, you don't shake hands. So these constraints can change. But they do change how we behave. What an institution can do, it can constrain the behavior of individuals in predictable ways. And you want that if you're writing laws, but you want that if you're a terrorist organization as well. You want to understand how to shape behavior of individuals in predictable ways. This also allows you to divide and specialize labor. If you crack open a terrorist organization, not every single person in the organization is good at every single thing. You're probably going to have a bombs expert in this group. They're the best at making bombs. You probably don't want them to go out and be your lookout. They might not be a great lookout, but they're great at making bombs. So for your organization, they'll be the bomb maker. This person over here will be the lookout. This person over here will be the person who does the recruitment on internet, things like that. And so an institution or an organization will divide and specialize labor and make it way more efficient to achieve those things. So if we're talking about suicide terrorism, we need someone in the organization to go out there and recruit suicide terrorists. We need the suicide terrorists themselves. One more thing I want to add about this is institutional stickiness. Once created, institutions change very slowly. It takes something like a coronavirus to get people to stop shaking hands, for example. You know, Donald Trump, even in the early days of this, was always seen on TV saying, here's this person that we have to help us with this, and he shakes their hand. And it really is only about a little bit later that people kept saying to him, if you're going to have people do social distancing, stop shaking hands with everybody on stage. But so we can change these behaviors. And terrorist organizations, just like any organization, is going to have these things, again, to help solve their collective action problem to prevent free riding. One of the big things about free riding, and I'll just leave you with this, it's going to help maybe explain this and the slide before. One of the biggest reasons why people free ride is because, well, there's obvious reasons, but one of the things is, I'll contribute if I know you're going to contribute. But if I don't think you're going to contribute, or I think you might not contribute, I won't contribute either. Why should I pay taxes if you're not going to pay taxes? And so the whole thing about the tax system is to make sure everybody looks like they're paying taxes so that I contribute as well. That's what institutionalization and voluntary community consent do, is it creates these organizations and solves the collective action problem by convincing everybody in the organization that if you contribute, I'll contribute just as much. You won't be the sucker, and the provision, the underprovided public good will become more provided. So that is a rational explanation about why how terrorist organizations work, why they do the things they do, how they recruit, and even if they get somebody crazy to be their suicide bomber, the organization is not crazy. It's using the suicide bombing in a very rational way. Does that help us think about how to do counterterrorism? And that's going to be our topic for Wednesday. That's it. See ya.